how do we pursue goals without becoming consumed by them? Can we have healthy aspirations or healthy ambitions without the constant need for more? Buddhism teaches how craving is the central cause of suffering, but that doesn't mean that all of our desires are problematic. In this video, I'm going to distinguish between the two, between craving on the one hand and healthy or wholesome aspiration on the other, and discuss why craving leads to suffering and discontentment, and provide tips for cultivating contentment while still pursuing meaningful goals. First, what is craving? Craving is an intense kind of self-centered desire that often ends up presenting as insatiable. Sort of, I must have this to be happy, or I need this to be complete. Suffering is understood to derive directly from this kind of craving in Buddhism. This is the second noble truth, that suffering arises due to craving. For the Buddha, there are three main types of craving: craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being, and craving for non-being. The first of these, craving for sensual pleasures, is our ordinary craving for pleasant experiences of certain kinds, for food, for a beautiful house, for comfort, and so on. The second of these, the craving for being, is our need for identity, for status, for being a certain kind of person, for success, for personal achievement. This feeling that we need to be successful in order to be anything. It also resolves itself in our sort of subconscious desire to be immortal, to never die. The third of these, the craving for non-being, involves a desire to eliminate unpleasant experiences, experiences that we don't like, as well as to eliminate parts of ourselves that we don't find attractive. This is where the idea that I'm no good comes from. It also, in very serious cases, resolves in a desire to cease existing, a desire to die. And these forms of craving present as essentially insatiable, in the sense that we may, for example, desire a promotion at our job because it involves greater status for ourselves, perhaps a bigger paycheck so we're able to afford more luxuries and so more beautiful sensory experiences of one kind and another. But then when we actually gain that promotion, we find we're back in the same place. We're not satisfied with the promotion we have and we want something more. Second, I want to distinguish what we might term healthy aspiration from craving. Genuine healthy aspiration is a goal-driven emotion that is more interested in, let's say, personal development, understanding, growth, rather than achievement and ownership. It doesn't involve so much of the ego-driven grasping that we find in craving. Or at the very least, it involves a much, much subtler level of it. In what I'm going to be discussing here, we have to understand that there may be indeed a spectrum here, on the one side being deep types of craving, ego-driven emotions, and on the other being a kind of an aspiration which is much less ego-driven, even though there may be some slight residue of ego as well there. Genuine aspiration is rooted in a desire to be helpful to others, to grow in wisdom and understanding, rather than to fill some internal void that we have or expunge some internal demon that we notice. There are several key differences that we can look out to distinguish aspiration from craving. Genuine aspiration is flexible, while craving tends to be rigid, in the sense that aspiration is a genuine desire to, again, to be helpful to ourselves and others, and as we notice that the way that we can be helpful may change from one time to another, our aspiration will change along with it. Whereas craving tends to be rigidly focused on one particular sort of goal. Aspiration tends to be open-hearted, while craving tends to be much more self-centered. Genuine aspiration is rooted in genuine interest in other people, interest to help, compassion, a desire to learn so that we can be helpful and make lives easier for people around us in whatever ways we find useful. On the other hand, craving is more about an ego-driven desire to fill some kind of internal void. Aspiration tends to be more grounded in reality, while craving tends to be somewhat delusional and fantasy-laden. So, for example, a genuine aspiration will change with whatever is in front of us. Since it is rooted in a genuine interest in others and desire to be helpful, we may notice from time to time that, again, whatever we need to do may change depending on the way things appear. And whatever difference we may make will take a lot of effort and time to achieve. It's not the sort of thing that can be achieved quickly or easily. Craving, on the other hand, tends to be focused on the immediate, tends to be focused on unrealistic aspirations of personal, what might be achieved about personal completeness and perfection in a quick way. To take one example, we might consider starting up a small business where we live. If we approach this from the point of view of genuine aspiration, we're going to ask ourselves how we can be most useful, how we can provide a useful service to our community so that we can, therefore, the business that we build will be successful because we're being useful to people around us and, again, providing a service. If, on the other hand, we're coming from a place of craving, we're going to look at that business rather more as a way of gaining status in our community and making lots of money quickly, without any genuine desire to help anybody except ourselves. Perhaps the key difference here is that there is a cycle of dissatisfaction with craving, which doesn't really appear quite so much with genuine aspiration. In the case of craving, there's always more to be achieved. The craving is never truly satisfiable. This is known as the hedonic treadmill. That is, we discuss the case of looking for a promotion in our job. We gain the promotion because we want that status, we want that money, and so we're running harder, we're working harder, we've gained that promotion, and yet once we're there, we realize that there's more still to achieve. If we gain a still further promotion, we'll gain still further status in our position, in our job, we'll gain still a higher paycheck, we'll be able to afford even more things. There is always another status of airline service that we can aspire to, whether it's business class, whether it's first class, whether it's renting a private jet, whether it's owning a private jet, and on and on and on. There's no real end to our desires, to our cravings. This is this treadmill where we're simply running faster and faster, but psychologically we're remaining in exactly the same place, always striving for more. That's because this kind of craving is essentially rooted in greed and dissatisfaction. On the other hand, a more healthy aspiration can at least potentially be fulfilled with a good job, a good family, a decent small business that we're running, being helpful to our community, working in a charity, many different ways that a genuine aspiration, for example, to be helpful, can be satisfied and we can find real fulfillment within it. To be clear, from an early Buddhist perspective, there is likely to be still a residue of subtle craving involved in any sort of lay business or lay opportunities such as the ones I've been discussing. This is something I mentioned before. Nevertheless, I think it is very important for us to distinguish between the subtle cravings that may be involved in this kind of a genuine aspirational work and the more gross kinds of craving that are more immediately dangerous to us and can cause more immediate suffering. That is, if we're on a path, a long path, a gradual path of reducing suffering, we can do so by trying to distinguish between this kind of craving and more healthy aspiration, and so through that pathway gain a more subtle, a better life, and the craving that we have, the suffering that we have becomes more and more subtle over time. Third, to pursue this kind of healthy aspiration, it's important for us to be able to balance our ambition with non-attachment. We can have healthy ambitions, but in order for them to be healthy, we have to learn to give up our attachment to outcomes, our tendency to grasp onto and crave a certain kind of result from the work that we are doing. We have to learn to be happy and satisfied in the work, in the present moment, and leave the future to itself. This provides us with a more open approach that doesn't define happiness in advance. Because after all, the outcomes are not in our control. This is something that the Buddha noted time and again. All that we can do is work on our intentions, the purity of our intentions, and we have to allow the future simply to take care of itself. In this way, what we can control is our right effort, our right intention along the Eightfold Path. Here we can perhaps visualize someone, an artist or a scientist, pursuing some goal out of pure interest in it, without any idea of where it's going to lead. Or we can think of a doctor or a nurse who is trying to help their patients without any guarantee that what they do is necessarily going to result in the patient being cured. Or for that matter, people who work for months on a political campaign that is not successful. People gain experience, gain happiness, gain a sense of community without necessarily looking for fame and wealth on the other end. These are all examples of gaining pleasure in the process itself, the process of helping others. Fourth, I want to look at some practices we can use to reduce craving. To begin with, we can come to our lives with a mindful attitude. Either we can literally sit in formal mindfulness meditation for, say, some period every day, or we can simply bring a mindful mindset into our ordinary lives. We can try to be aware of when these kinds of cravings arise in our mind stream and not try to push them away, but simply to become aware of them. We can ask ourselves, how do they really feel? Do they feel pleasant? Do they feel unpleasant? When do they arise? Out of what experiences do they arise? When we feel ourselves craving a particular thing, we can ask ourselves, do we really need this thing? Does this thing really make us happy? Is it going to really make us happy? Or is it going to be another step on this hedonic treadmill that leaves us in the same place once we've gotten it? We can also take time to mindfully reflect upon the impermanence of all things, including status, wealth, ownership. We can ask ourselves about things that we have possessed and owned in the past and what has happened to them now. Where has the craving gone now? We could also pursue a gratitude practice. That is to change our focus from what's absent in our lives that we have to become owners of to what is present in our lives that we already are surrounded with. This can help us to cultivate a sense of happiness, and we can even use this kind of practice every day to note 3 things that we are grateful for, perhaps at the end of the day. 3 things that have happened that have been good for us, that we can be grateful for. Perhaps these are things that we're surrounded with anyway, but that we don't ordinarily even notice. We can also focus on contentment. That is, think of life as an open journey rather than a path with a set goal. That way, we can hold goals. I mean, of course, goals and aspirations can be useful, but we don't want to give up on our appreciation and contentment with the present moment. Because after all, the present moment at the end of the day is all that we have. So if we can learn to be content with what is right now, even while we may in the longer term pursue greater ethical or spiritual or personal goals, if we can learn to be content with the way things are right now, then we can learn to enjoy the process of walking along whatever path we're on to whatever goal that we feel is useful to us and useful to the people around us. Fifth, in conclusion, craving leads to suffering and dissatisfaction. It's an essentially insatiable desire for more. But we can live lives of true purpose and ambition if we simply try to give up our attachment to and craving for the outcomes. We can focus on the process with an eye to helping ourselves through helping other people. This way we can gain true progress without the stress and anxiety of having to achieve ends that are not really achievable or that we can never be sure of achieving. So try one of the practices that I mentioned, such as focusing on gratitude or mindfully investigating cravings when they arise and considering cravings that have arisen in your mind in the past. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha discusses contentment as the ultimate wealth. And I think this is a wonderful passage for us to reflect upon, because so much of our greed, our cravings are around wealth, acquiring wealth. And yet, what is all that wealth really for? What's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is to gain contentment. So we might reflect about how much better our lives would be, how much better the world would be, if instead of focusing on the accumulation of wealth for its own sake, instead we turn to accumulating contentment in our lives. How can we go about that? Now, in a prior video, I talked about this kind of paradox of wealth that we find discussed in Buddhism, in early Buddhism. And I'll leave a link to that video up here on the screen if you haven't seen it or want to refresh your memory. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked up here on the screen or down below in the notes, and see if you want to help support the channel and the work that I'm doing here. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.